Good day and welcome to SCO BRICS Insight, where we talk about what's really going on in the world of Russia and the BRICS. Now, my name is Rhod Mackenzie, and today I want to talk about it appears that the paranoid and Russophobic Baltic states and their equally Russophobic neighbour Poland have come up with a novel way to defend their borders from an imagined land invasion by Russian forces. They're going to drown them in a swamp. Yeah, this is the cunning plan they've thought up to defend their borders. Now, they've planned an extensive network of defensive structures in the Baltic and Polish border regions, enhanced by the restoration of the region's swamps, which were drained some time ago, around the turn of the 20th century. Now, this laughable idea is being given serious consideration, and it's been suggested that the swamps will protect the Baltics and the Poles from Russian aggression, but it appears that the true objectives of these events are unrelated. Now, in May of this year, representatives of the four countries neighbouring Russia decided to combine to create the Baltic Line of Defence. Now, the agreement is on the construction of which Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia signed on the 19th of January 2024, plus the Polish Eastern Shield project. Now, the total cost of constructing these barriers is estimated at €11.35 billion, and this will be funded by the EU, no doubt, because these countries are skint and dependent on handouts from Brussels. Now, the financial resources in question are going to be allocated from the so-called counter-mobility means as obstacles to the movement of equipment and troops. Now, the modernisation of the border infrastructure and the introduction of surveillance technologies will also happen. It's also been promised that modern defensive barriers will be created along the entire eastern border of the EU to a depth of 20 to 40 kilometres along the 2,300 kilometre total border. Now, it's envisaged that the surveillance and reconnaissance systems, electronic warfare systems, air defence, anti-tank and anti-landing obstacles, and other engineering structures will be installed. Now, it was stated that the construction is scheduled for completed by 2028, so hopefully Russia decides not to invade before they're ready. Now, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia and Poland are also withdrawing from the Ottawa Convention, also known as the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Treaty. It was decided that it's imperative to enhance the deterrent and defence capabilities. As such, it's essential to seed the border strip with mines. Now, the population of the border territories was hardly reassured by the statements that the mines would be stored in special warehouses and would be put out only in the event of an immediate threat. Now, the authorities of Lithuania, Poland, Latvia and Estonia are set to generate substantial revenue from this project, with plans to get a significant fund from the pan-European initiative called the EU Eastern Border Initiative. Now, the Poles and the Balts are calling for EU taxpayer support, citing the assertion that they're increasing the defence potential of the eastern flank of NATO and the EU. Now, before I continue, I'd like to make an appeal. If you enjoy my videos, you can help me fund the channel and contribute to its further development. Now, you can do this by making a small donation, which you can do by clicking on the thanks button at the bottom right-hand side of the video screen, or by clicking on the Buy Me a Coffee link below in the credits. Everybody who donates does get a personal thank you from me, and I'm thanking you all now. Now, do keep the comments coming. Love to read them, love to respond to them. Now, these measures have proved insufficient to address the concerns of the Baltic states. Now, the other day, members of the Latvian Parliamentary Commission on Defence, Internal Affairs and Corruption Prevention received a draft of the counter-mobility law specifically developed by the country's Ministry of Defence. Now, according to a source, special legal regulation will be introduced in Latvia at a depth of 30 kilometres from the border with Russia, enabling armed forces to promptly carry out the necessary activities in the specific sectors and locations. The new law establishes provisions for the regulation and process of expropriating land from owners in the border zone and the felling of forests. Now, the introduction of an easement for this purpose is being considered, or alternatively, the alienation of the necessary real estate projects. However, it is promised that compensation will be paid for any such actions. By the end of August, the existing roads have already been dug up and anti-tank ditches have been dug and reinforced with concrete dragon's teeth. Now, the placement of obstacles was adapted to the landscape using swamps, forests and other natural objects. Now, it's interesting to note that the nuances that have emerged from this discussion. Now, as reported by the military defence department, the deployment of obstacles such as steel cables, barbed wire and razor wire along the border will be considered in the event of a state of emergency. In contrast, the Latvian Ministry of Defence has stated that anti-tank mining has already been carried out at the border. And with regard to the assurances that the mines will be stored in designated warehouses, well, what is the current status? Well, it's a bit opaque. It appears that the Ministry of Defence has decided that in this instance the fog of war is an appropriate strategy, and it's going to be left so that the aggressors are not sure whether the mines have been deployed or not. Now, one advantage of this new development for forest owners is they'll no longer be required to clear and cut down brush, and since the undergrowth will now serve as part of this defence, ensuring the density of the greenery. Now, the construction of the defensive line has encountered strong objections from representatives of people who live in the border municipalities. Now, the eastern region of Latvia, known as Latgale, is projected to be the most affected. Now, the chairman of the Latgale Planning Region Development Council, Aldis Adamovics, has issued a formal protest to the country's leadership. He states that the draft law is not in alignment with the Constitution as it hinders the development prospects of the region of Latgale. Adamovics has performed some straightforward calculations. He says the length of the Russian-Latvia border is 270.5 kilometres and the Latvia-Belarusian border is 172.9 kilometres. Therefore, by calculating the area multiplied by 30 kilometres in depth, we're approximately 13,000 square kilometres, which falls within this so-called alienation zone. Now, a significant part of the economic activity of this territory will be lost, and Latgale's total area is only 14,500 square kilometres, so it's evident that the impact will expand well beyond Latgale, although the majority of the consequences will be happening there. Adamovics also expressed concerns that the bill contains numerous blank spots, plus all the previously adopted regulations on construction, forestry and ecology have all been cancelled. He also made the following observation: the bill does not provide for the procedure for organising the creation of defence infrastructure on the property of local governments, for example, schools, hospitals, cemeteries, etc. Also, local governments are under no obligation to transfer property or enter into agreements with the Ministry of Defence. According to Adamovics, the new law appears to contravene property rights and business interests, and there are concerns that it contradicts the principles of the law and environmental projects. Now, he also refers to the Constitution of Latvia, which stipulates the right of the population to live in a favourable environment and to adhere to the legal acts of the European Union, which protects specially protected natural areas. Now, he also expressed concern that the appetites of the Ministry of Defence impose significant restrictions on the property rights of individuals. He says that the construction of the right-of-way will result in the failure of any development plans for Latgale and further depopulation of the region, which is also one of the poorest and most sparsely populated in Latvia. Now, another politician who voiced strong opposition to the 30-kilometre right-of-way was Daugavpils Peace Mayor Andres Elkins. He noted that Daugavpils is entirely within the 30-kilometre zone, and Latvia is facing significant challenges, and the situation in the eastern borderland is particularly acute. Now, a comparable situation has also emerged in Lithuania. There, 27 or so-called engineering parks have already been established near the borders with Russia and Belarus, where dragon's teeth, anti-tank hedgehogs, rolls of barbed wire, and other equipment for building fences are stored. Now, land reclamation canals are being deepened, forest pathways are being cut along the side of the roads, and the fords across the Neman River on the border with Russia are being strengthened. Now, Vilnius the capital of Lithuania, plans to spend 1.25 billion euros on counter-mobility equipment over the next 10 years, with a significant portion of this money coming from the EU structural funds. Neris Zapielakis, who's head of the Lithuanian Wetland Restoration and Protection Fund, has announced that the state is considering a plan to restore the previously drained wetlands on the border with Belarus. He said the area of the wetlands in the region on the border with Belarus were once actually very large. According to his calculations, there are already 60,000 acres of wetlands in this border zone, but around half of them have been drained. He said the restoration of such an area of wetland would take more than a decade, and the cost of restoring each hectare would vary between 500 and 2,000 euros, or perhaps even more. However, he is convinced that these costs will be justified, as the wetlands will provide reliable defence for Lithuania against any potential invasion coming from Belarus. Zablak has also called on the neighbouring countries of Latvia and Estonia to utilise their natural resources as a means of protection. Now, it's reasonable to assume that this idea was actually inspired by what happened back in March with NATO, when an armoured personnel carrier carrying 4 American soldiers sank in the swamps near the Pavled training ground, and they didn't get found for a week. Now, Alexander Novich has a comment to make. He says, what a wonderful way to protect yourself drowning in a swamp. Now, in Lithuania, they identified an argument of why they should not support the agricultural sector and allow it to decline. He said the original historic chain of swamps with the border would prevent Russian tanks from traversing the area. Now, this obviously contains all the kind of information that you really need to find out how crazy the Baltic countries have become in the Russophobic policy, and reaching the point where it's becoming absurdity, and they're destroying all of the progress made from civilization and going back to the time of swamps and feudal restrictions. However, despite that, there is probably some logic to their behaviour. As they decline to generate revenue from interactions with Russia and Belarus, they need to get some money from somewhere, and obviously the EU is the wonderful way to do it. So the Baltic states are currently seeking financial assistance from the EU to address this issue of the alleged Russian aggression. Now, the Baltic authorities are not really concerned about the ineffectiveness of their so-called counter-mobility measures that they're planning to implement. I mean, I think they even realise, although they keep scaremongering, there's no likelihood of Russia invading, and secondly, the swamps cannot defend against the threats posed by aviation and drones. However, for the EU leadership, it's essential to appear to be concerned about the Baltic states and the potential Russian invasion, and to allocate the funds for counter-mobility, seemingly because they have a personal interest in managing the significant financial resources that are available for this. So, this is the latest mad Russophobic happening in the Baltics. Thanks for watching. Please set the alert button so you get informed when I post a new video. Like and subscribe, and if you want to help me out by making a donation, click on the thanks button at the bottom of the screen or the buy me a coffee link below in the credits. Thank you.